I wanted to talk about this. I talked about it a little bit yesterday. Chuck Schumer demanded that Fox News fire Tucker Carlson because an 18-year-old who was psychotic, went to Buffalo and shot those 10 innocent people at the grocery store. And there's no mention, I went and did research on this psycho. There's no mention of Tucker Carlson that I can see in any of his writings or any suggestion that he ever watched Tucker Carlson's show. He appeared to get lost in the fringes of the internet. And I want to mention something that I think should be a huge part of this discussion. And I say this as a father of 3 boys myself. This was an 18-year-old. Where does parental responsibility weigh in here? The person who is responsible for mass shootings is the person who does the mass shooting, period. It's not who the president is. It's not who's on television. It's not who they listen to. The person who does the mass shooting is responsible. But if we wanted to discuss who else might be responsible, it wouldn't be a media figure. There are millions of people who listen to my radio show that believe all sorts of things. I'm not responsible for what they believe. It's an insane argument to make. When a Bernie Sanders supporter shot Steve Scalise and almost killed him during the middle of a practice for the House Republican softball team, nobody came out and said Bernie Sanders has to resign because one of the volunteers on his campaign decided to shoot Republicans. Nobody on the Republican side sent letters to MSNBC demanding that they pull Rachel Maddow off the air. That's an illogical response. It's nonsense. But it is fair to ask, I think, and I'm saying this as a parent of 3 boys, where were the parents here? Where were the parents of this 18-year-old who got a gun and went and killed 10 innocent people? How did they allow their 18-year-old son, who was living at their home, to become so radicalized and for that toxic cocktail of mental illness combined with the internet to lead us here? How did this happen with both of them home with this kid? Where is parental responsibility as a part of the discussion here? How did their kid get radicalized? How was he able to get a gun? How did he travel, scout, write a 180-page manifesto inside of their house and they do nothing about it? These are 2 civil engineers. They have money and resources to be able to aid and assist their children. How did we get here? If you're going to extend the prism of blame beyond the shooter, the next step should be, how did these parents fail so horribly to understand what their child was doing? He planned this for months. He wrote a 180-page manifesto. He had talked about shooting everyone at his school. If you had a son who had been hospitalized for talking about shooting everyone at his school, would you allow him to have unfettered access to the internet? Would you allow him to have weapons? Would you allow him to have access to your cars, to travel hours away to his heart's desire? I don't understand how we're not talking more about the failure of these parents and far less about media. Look, I try to monitor what my kids see on the internet. Do I do a great job of it? Probably not. But we have a public computer in a room, so when the kids are using it, you can walk by at any point and see what they're doing there. If my son was writing a 180-page manifesto, I think it would be hard for him to manage to do that for months without me seeing. And I know that raising children is challenging, particularly when they become teenagers. I've got a teenager in my house. I'll have a couple of teenagers here soon, additionally. But I do think a big part of this discussion should be, how did these parents not see what was going on with their child? Particularly given all of the signs of how violent he was, of how predisposed he seemed to be to want to kill people. What were they doing that they managed to not stop this at all? And how did they not get him consistent treatment? And how, at a minimum, did they not keep weapons away from him and limit his access to cars and potentially the internet? These are all real questions that I think deserve to be asked if we are going to assess blame beyond the shooter himself, because, again, the shooters bear almost all of the blame. Individuals bear responsibility for their action. But if you're going to take the next step, I wouldn't go to the Republican Party, and I wouldn't go to people who are on television, and I wouldn't go to elected officials. I'd go with the mom and dad who live with him every single day. That would be where I would go. So just keep that in mind. Why are we not having that conversation?